Now, if you've clicked on this video because you've seen the word mastering, I don't have all the answers. I can only offer my little two bob. But along the way, I hope that some of these processes may be of use to you. Now, if you look online, there are tons of companies that offer remote mastering. You send them a file and they send you something back mastered. Well, the trouble with that is it's not really possible to scrutinize it, and indeed what you get back may be not what you hoped. So how do you do it then? Are there processes? Well, of course there are, and I can show you some of those, and then you can hear for yourself. It's all about your ears. It's not really about plugins and what settings you need, because all music is different. So let's take a look. On the display you can see a tune I've got open on Logic Pro X. This is not app specific, so all of the mastering software that exists, you can do pretty much the same thing on it. But I'm going to show you what it is in Logic X. Now I've got a tune here that I've been working on. This is a tune from what I hope is going to be my new album.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Who knows when we're out again?
So that's like the chorus line. I've got drums, bass. I mean, this is sort of work in progress at the moment, and I've got some vocals there. Now, on the left-hand side of Logic, this page here, you can see that I've got my master fader.
Hot air on air, back to the face.
At the moment, it's nearly at the top of the range, nearly at the top of that meter. Now, if I was taking this to a mastering facility, let's just say I'm just the mix engineer and I'm going to send it to the mastering engineer, I would start by applying a bit of attenuation on that output. Mastering engineers really like it if you give them something that's between 4 and 6 dB down from the maximum level. They don't want to hear something that's compressed to within an inch of its life first, because they can't really do anything with it. Now, the idea of mastering is to simply make your, well, I say simply, it simply is not the operative word here. They listen to the tune, they decide where it sits in the market, decide whether it sounds like this or whether it sounds like that. And this is all based on massive listening experience. And of course, they're often experienced musicians themselves and will basically be able to hear where this thing is going to sit. If you go into a mastering facility, there are lots of very expensive equalizers, limiters, compressors, a great set of speakers, of course, that goes without saying, in a room that is sympathetic. That mastering engineer will know the speakers inside out. They will have listened to all of their favourite records, or indeed the genre that if you're a funk musician and you take your stuff in, they might put a record on that you may like. You can go in there with reference material as well, so saying, I really like this, but I like that as well. And all of that dialogue, basically, you are putting the pieces together to say what your record is going to sound like. Now, at the moment, this record for me is deficient in mid-range, upper mid-range. So it's a bit sort of flat, it's a bit flabby sounding. So really, what I could do first is to actually put an equalizer on this with some sort of lift or presence boost. Now, you can do all this pre-mastering, but they don't want to hear something, or if you're mastering on here, you don't want to compress things to within an inch of their lives. So if I just try that, for example, that's a 3 dB boost at 3 kilohertz.
Hot air on air, back to the face.
And now without.
Hot air on air.
Yeah, I like it with just a bit of eh.
Hot air on air.
That sound again. Eh.
Back to the face. Who knows when we're out again?
Now you get an analyzer on your equalizer. At the moment, it's showing me stuff, but really your ears are the ultimate judge. If you see a massive peak somewhere, the chances are you'll be able to hear it anyway.
Hot air on air.
Now, as a consequence of my boosting of EQ, the master fader, you can see that there's a red number there, 1.0. It's actually outputting at a higher level than theoretically possible. Now, what Logic does, and lots of other digital audio workstations, is that there's a little algorithm that basically just stops it digitally distorting. Because if that happened, you would take the tweeters out on your speakers quite easily, especially if you're monitoring at a higher volume. Now, that means that I've got to attenuate somewhere. Now, you can do this in most equalizers. There's usually a master output or something like that. So I did that. That means that actually my boosted EQ is unity, and actually I've cut everywhere else, so it's kind of the same operation. So if I go back to the beginning and press play and just reset the overall output level.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Who knows when we're out again?
So I'm now nearly 2 dB below full scale. Maybe I could attenuate it a little bit more. Now, you could either do this in a channel equalizer, or you could actually apply a gain stage. Usually there's something like this on a workstation where I can say, okay, well, I'm gonna maybe take it down another 3 decibels, 3 dB. So this time I've got something that's much quieter.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Who knows when we're out again?
Okay, so I'm minus 4.7. That's a good start, especially if you're going to take this to somebody who say, right, master this in the style of, I don't know, Steely Dan or whatever. It's one of my favourite bands. And so they would then put it through a series of things, including equalizers and limiters and compressors. So for my purposes, for just tweaking the master output on Logic, I'm going to start with something called a multi-pressor. What's this then? Well, it's a compressor, but there are 3 or 4 bands. Some mastering engineers, you have 3-band EQ, some use 4. There's 4 on Logic Pro X. If I wanted to use 3, I could just disable one of them, allowing just 3 bands. So play with it to make it sort of the best of the music that you use or you produce. Sometimes will require 3 or 4. It doesn't matter which. So looking at this, there is a central line here. You've got your band 1, 2, 3 and 4, which basically span the entire frequency range from 20 Hz all the way up to 20 kilohertz, which is human frequencies. So you have all of these controls down here. You can see there's a meter for input and output on each band. You can bypass the bands. You can just listen to one band only.
Hot air on air, back.
That's quite useful, but really you don't want to be soloing things out too much. You want to listen to the whole thing as a holistic piece of music. So we have compression threshold, ratio and gain makeup. These are the main things that you'll be using. Of course, there are attack and release times as well. Attack time is how quickly the compressor acts when it actually switches on, and releases the opposite. What happens when the level of the music goes below that level and allows the compressor to reset. No specific advice on that really. You can play with those at your taste. So ratio, that's how much compression it actually does. So if you really want to hammer the bass compression, you might actually take the ratio up and the compression down, and you can see now that there's going to be a massive swing on the left hand side of your screen.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Who knows when we're out again?
Actually, it's not huge. Let's listen now to the, I'm just going to solo 2 bars. I'm just going to take 2 bars here. 11, 13, and just listen to it with that and without it. It really is worth the time taken just to get this right. So first of all, with the compressor off, and then when it repeats, I'm going to switch the compressor on.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air on air, back to the face.
What it's actually done is really squash the bass only. It's left everything else untouched, and that's the beauty of something like this, is if you want to compress the bass, it won't affect anything else, and that's actually a really good thing to have. If you just put a compressor across everything, if you've got a bass drum that's really loud, it's just going to squash everything and you end up with this sort of pumping effect, and you don't want that at all. Now I've taken that bass away because of the reduction, I can actually bring it back up again using this called gain makeup. So it essentially restores the output level if it has been reduced.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air on air, back to the face.
what it's done is it's actually brought the energy of the bass up just ever so slightly. Now, these are really subtle things here. You don't want to be making the thing so that it's pumping and really, really loud, because you take the dynamics of the original tune away. Let's say you have quieter bits. You don't want the whole thing just to come in, just to literally be right in your face. You don't want that at all. So I'm going to do... Beforehand, I was a little bit scathing of my own mix with the fact that there wasn't really much presence there. I could actually have a go at that by just raising this and actually applying some sort of compression in the mid-range as well.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air on air, back to the face.
So without that, that was with, and then without.
Hot air on air, back to the face.
And with.
Hot air on air, back to the face.
What it's actually allowed is those chorus vocals just to come up a bit. Now, you cannot fix problems with the mix at the mastering stage. If you've got a mix that's not really all that good, it's virtually impossible to do anything about it with mastering. Because if, for example, you had a guitar underneath those vocals, the sort of choppy guitar with the vocals, and you wanted to bring the guitar down and the vocals up, they're both in the same frequency band. So if you start compressing the vocals and hoping that guitar will go away, it's not going to do that. You'll be compressing two things at once, and the whole mix will start to sound really vague. So let's assume that you're happy with that.
Hot air on air.
I'm just going to have a little look at the band in between, because I don't want the smiley face sort of equalizer where I really neglect the mid-range.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air on air, back.
Okay, I'm a bit more happy with that, because the sort of low mid where the sort of the Hammond organ is beginning to sound a little bit more coherent versus the bass and the vocals. So this is really where it is. You can't specify a mastering plugin for one type of music and expect that it's going to, one size fits all. It simply isn't the case. Now, the top end, the very top end, sometimes 3 bands are used, because actually the top end is so devoid of energy usually, unless you've got somebody going on a pair of hi-hats. You may want to squash those a bit. But I haven't really got anything. It's just the vocals. The drums are fairly sort of bottom heavy on this. It's bass and mid. There's not really much in the way of hi-hats.
Hot air on air, back to the face.
There's more treble in those vocals than there are on the cymbals. If I just tried something at the top there.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air on air, back to the face.
Really, it's more acting as a de-esser for my vocals. So every time there's an S sound, it sort of squashes. So I'm not going to worry about that band. So I'm going to bypass it. Now let's just see what's happening with the output fader now. It looks just that I've got 3 dB under full scale. Actually 4 dB, 3.8. So my final thing to do is, rather than build the output level here, I need to make sure that it is not going to go above 0 dB on my full scale. So you can also apply, if you want a bit of post EQ, I'm going to do that. I'm just going to sort of boost here, and actually I want a bit of breath, so I'm going to try sort of maybe 14 kilohertz, just boost a little bit there, so that I've got a bit more breathiness over the whole mix.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air.
Okay, now I'm going to put, the last thing I'm going to put is a limiter. Now what a limiter does is, well, it's pretty clear from the title, it stops it going above a certain level, which is the magic 0 dB line. Now, in the days of CD players, actually CD manufacturers didn't want anything that would peak at 0. Usually it would be peak at minus 0.1 or minus 0.2, just in case a digital to analog converter actually threw up a bit of distortion. So CDs were very often mastered just below the 0 dB line. Of course, nowadays we've got everything is much, much more accurate in the digital domain. But I could say output level of minus 0.2, perhaps. Let's go with that, just to be safe. Just in case, this isn't going on CD. But I'm going to play back, and now I'm going to raise the gain of the limiter until I see a little bit of reduction here, and the output is sort of a bit higher. It's not particularly clear from this because you can see on the input line I've got 0 here, but the output 0 line is higher up. So it gives you a bit of a false impression of how much gain you are actually applying. But again, your ears have to check.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air on air, back to the face.
Now you have a release time on this of quite a long time, of 1/4 of a second. If I had the release time a little bit lower, now I'm just going to take the output of my mixing desk down here and I'm going to ramp the gain right up. And you can see how, you can hear how rough this is going to sound.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air on air.
Horrible. So it's pumping and then the compressor's taking time to recover. And if I have the release really low, it just doesn't know what to do at all. It just goes...
Hot air on air, back.
No, we don't want that. What we need is something that is going to have a bit more of a gentle release time and not so much gain. So if I take the faders back up here, we want about, well, looking at just a little bit of reduction. Use the reduction meter, gives you the amount of reduction that you're actually applying. And I've found over the years, now this is of course because of having experience in listening, it's not all about the figures before you go in. It's what you get used to using. So I usually apply anywhere between no more than 3 dB compression, reduction, overall reduction.
Hot air on air, back to the face. Hot air on air.
And there you go. This means that your master fader is now limiting at the output level that you set. Now you can, even though it's digital plugins, you can overload them. If you've got too much level on one plugin and you're expecting another plugin to do some work on that, sometimes it's just not going to work at all, especially if it's an equalizer where you're trying to boost something. It's just sending everything into wild distortion. So you can, if you want to, you can insert these gain stages wherever you like, just to make sure that you are feeding every single plugin with what it wants. So there's my 2 bob on mastering. Of course, for another of my records, it would be a completely different ballgame. I'll apply EQ in other areas. And of course, that equalization where I said it was a bit deficient at 3 kilohertz, that could be an issue with the mix. There might be something that I can do just to balance those frequencies. So there we are. There's a little insight.